work at the national level. So I'm pretty excited to be here. There's just a couple of things that I want to talk about. One is a lot of people are wondering how the code process changed when it comes to the energy code. So in the past, the energy code has been written in the same consensus process that all of the other codes were written. Then some concern came up over the last year or two about how it gets written, who's who is involved, and is there some gaming going on, or is there some different things that are happening? How can we make this a better process where more people are equally represented, that sort of thing? So the ICC Board of Directors had taken over that code process and said, all right, it's still going to be called a code. It's still going to be adoptable with all of the other codes, but we're going to write it under a different process. It'll still be consensus, but it will be a standards process that's approved through ANSI, an ANSI approved process. So it's a standards process using consensus committee procedures. So it's just a little bit different. Normally in the past, we had 1 year that if we were on a committee, we had 1 year that we were writing that energy code and everything was done in that year. Now it's spread out a little bit. So I used to have a committee hearing, then whatever the committee decided, it went to a public, out to the public, had a public hearing, and then had a governmental consensus vote at the end. And now it's a technical committee that will hear all of these proposals. Everybody can still be involved. Everybody can still submit proposals, anybody can. And the committee will look at those over a greater amount of time. They'll put some drafts together and break up into some subgroups to just kind of make the committee less, or to make the tasks a little bit more manageable, maybe break it up by envelope and HVAC and lighting and the different things that the energy code covers. And so those subgroups will look at all of those proposals that the public submits. They will write their own proposals. They will put a draft together of what they think should go into the next energy code. It will go to the committee for some review. They'll spit it back saying, no, fix this, add this, whatever. And then it'll go to the public again for an additional review and comments and recommendations. And it'll come back to the committees to finalize. So this whole process takes a couple years now. So code proposals are due October 12th. Already, and we will have a finished code. Our task, I know I serve on the commercial committee, and we've been tasked to be complete by April of 2023. It's a little bit longer process. Some things of interest is the people that make up the committee. The committee used to be 15 people. Now it's about 45 people, but there's of different groups. So it's manufacturers, builders, testing labs or standard writers, users, utilities, consumers, public, government regulators, and insurance. So you could see it's, they made sure that the committee was well represented, and there's a rule that none of those interest groups could make up more than a third of the committee. So you can see with 9 interest groups, it's pretty spread out. There's not very much chance that you're going to get a majority of any interest group there. So that's good. So in the end, it's a code. It's adoptable with all your other family of codes. Nothing about that has changed. It's just the way we write it that has changed. So a couple things to just keep in mind is when they switched to this process, when we were writing the last code, there were a lot of things that didn't make it into the code that people thought should, like electrification or EV charging. It's just some different things that could have gone in there, but they felt that the scope of the energy code at the time didn't really scope out those kind of things. So ICC with this change also redid the scope. And so I find it interesting when I look at the intent, the scope and the intent of the code now. It used to just say the intent of this code is to regulate buildings for the use of energy over the life of the building. Well, now the code is to provide market-driven enforceable requirements for the design and construction of commercial buildings, providing minimum efficiency requirements for buildings that result in a maximum level of energy efficiency that's safe, technologically feasible, and life cycle cost effective, considers an economic feasibility, include potential costs and savings for consumers and building owners, and return on investment. Additionally, it provides a jurisdiction with a supplemental requirement, including ASHRAE 90.1 and the options that lead to achievement of zero energy buildings. So There's also it's also stated in the intent that there needs to be a glide path to zero energy by 2030 as an option in there for jurisdictions. And then it goes on further to say that the requirements contained in the code will include, but are not limited to, a prescriptive and a performance path. And it may include non-mandatory appendices that incorporates additional energy efficiency and greenhouse gas reduction resources developed by the Code Council and others. And then it will also, in all of that, even though we're adding a lot more, it's specific to say that the aim is to simplify the code requirements to make it easier to use and get better compliance. And that it's updated every 3 years, and every subsequent edition has to increase energy savings over the prior edition. So you can see in this new scope, it is way more broad. We are going to be able to include things like greenhouse gas emission, carbon, reduction. We can include net zero paths, and we can include a lot more in there now with this new scope. So pretty interesting. I will just say that, it's the previous code cycles, a lot of people, me included, loved the old process. But some things to note about the new process is that you have to always get better in energy efficiency. You can never roll back. That's stated in the intent. You have to provide a path to zero so that jurisdictions could use that if they want. And there's an immediate path to zero, which is already in the appendices, or you can also have to provide a path to zero by 2030. So you could choose either or if you're a jurisdiction on where you want to go with your community. And so those are some nice things about this code, but they're also things that we're going to talk about probably later on about they're nice, but how do we make them work? Are we ready for them? What do we do? And so that's pretty much the change in the process. That's coming for 2024 code that we're writing right now. The other things that to look at to 2021, and we talk about, all right, how are we going to be ready for 2021? What do we need to know? What is it that we need to look at for 2021? There's some things definitely that we need to pay attention to. These are highlights of some major changes from previous code cycles to now. It's definitely not every single change, but just some things to note as we prepare our minds for how do we make all this work, and what do we have to look forward to. Prescriptive compliance now says that apartment buildings can now, instead of, the energy code breaks apartment buildings into a residential, if it's 3 stories or less, has to comply with the residential code. Commercial, 4 stories or more, complies with the commercial code. Well, now it's saying if you're an apartment, you don't have to comply with the commercial provisions if you meet R406, which is the additional, or the energy rating index path, the ERI path. And so you can use, it's a performance type path using a score for compliance. And so that's now an option for those apartment buildings, which is nice to give some more options. Oops, sorry, I didn't mean to do that. All right, and for greenhouses, that's not, in the past, pretty much greenhouses have been exempt from the building envelope requirements and the lighting requirements, but all of that has changed. So you now have a new section on greenhouses that gives them some requirements for the code, and they're only exempt if they meet low energy provisions using less than a certain amount of BTUs or watts per square foot. And so now they're not exempt anymore. There's new lighting requirements and there's new envelope provisions for greenhouses. New section's a little bit complicated and confusing, but it does try to separate low energy from the big energy users that greenhouses can definitely be. So that's one. For the envelope, really, if you look at the changes in the 2021 for commercial buildings, it really, there's hardly any changes on the warmer climates. It's truly cold climate trends of more insulation in the attics, higher continuous insulation R values on the walls, some changes to the slabs and floors, and the insulation on the slabs have to go deeper into the ground than they used to, those kind of things. So it's really the majority of the changes across the board were for those cold climates to make a little bit better envelope. And then envelope commissioning, that's new for commercial buildings. It's kind of a 2-step process, one where you actually have to test the building. It's dependent on size of the building, it's dependent on climate zone, it's dependent on occupancy. There's a different testing requirement for residential occupancies versus everything else. So there's some different things you need to know in there, but blower door tests have come in to the commercial side. So that's in there. And then also you still have to outside, the blower door is really testing the whole assembly, whereas there's also a requirement phase 2 to test just the air barrier to make sure to commission that air barrier. Somebody has to look at the plans and look at the air barrier as it's being constructed to make sure that it's good. And so those requirements come in for that. Interlocking openings, we can thank Hope for this. Interlocking openings is new. There's a lot of restaurants that like those overhead doors to open and close. And so all of a sudden you have this big, huge, 50 square foot opening that is letting all of the energy out of the building. And so there's a new requirement in there that if you have a opening greater than 40 square feet, and there's exceptions to everything in the code. But the premise is if you have these big, huge openings that you're going to open, that they need to be interlocked with the HVAC system so that the heating or cooling sets back and isn't operating. If you're trying to cool the inside to 70 degrees and it's 100 degrees outside and you open that big opening, that your cooling can only now cool to, 90 degrees instead of 70 because it needs to be set back so you're not using so much energy. So that's new. There's also some provisions for mechanical, for ventilation. Ventilation is, we're making those buildings tighter and we have a lot more people in there. Ventilation is huge in commercial buildings as it speaks to the energy use of a building. So you can, the more air you have to bring in at outside temperature into a commercial building, the heating and the cooling has to offset that. And so, we can't, how do we regulate how much you bring in? We have to have fresh air. The code goes into demand control ventilation. It used to just be in certain occupancies over a certain size. Now it comes in any single zone system that has to have economizers has to also meet demand control ventilation. So really demand control, that's ventilating to the demand and not just a base minimum that you get out of the mechanical code. So that's in there. Enclosed parking garages have some requirements for ventilation controls, and then there's some more additional requirements for the use of energy recovery ventilation. So you see ventilation heavily addressed. When it comes to lighting controls, the whole lighting section was redone. The lighting controls really got cleaned up. There are some new requirements that the lighting controls like occupancy sensors have to shut off sooner than they used to. There's some new requirements for occupancy sensors in corridors. There's some that brings it into alignment with the building code. There's some additional requirements for the lighting controls in warehouses and open office spaces. All of that got refined and defined a little bit more. The daylighting was defined a little bit more by saying now we have 2 daylight zones. Basically, you have a primary that's right next to the window, and beyond that is a secondary daylight zone that needs to also be looked at for controls. When there's enough daylight coming in, it shuts off those lights to save some energy. So that got put in there. There's also lighting controls for plant growth. We used to have all of these lights everywhere to grow the plants, and I love there's a saying, lumens are for humans. That's because the plants don't necessarily look at lumens. They are looking at micromoles, and they're looking at light in a different light. And so so the requirements have to be different for the plant growth, but they have some efficiencies now that they have to meet. And so that's great. It's not just, they don't get a free exemption for plant growth anymore. Energy monitoring, that's been in ASHRAE 90.1 for a long time, but now it's in the IECC. Enclosed office spaces, conference rooms, break rooms, classrooms, those kind of workstations, if they that's controlled receptacle. The energy monitoring, it's a mandatory requirement, and it's to measure, monitor, record, report energy consumption in new buildings over 25,000 square feet. There are a couple exceptions for R2 buildings, apartment buildings, but basically you're going to be required to measure, monitor, record, and report your energy consumption in buildings over 25,000 square feet. The controlled receptacles, that's the one where now 50% of all your 125 volt, 15 and 20 amp receptacles are controlled. And that's for offices, conference rooms, break rooms, classrooms, those types of locations have this, and there's different ways to do that, but you have to have controlled receptacles, which has always been contentious at the code hearings. Efficiency package options, they used to say you have to provide some efficiency. You do everything in the code that's a minimum, but now you have to go above it. Not above it. You have, in order to get the energy savings that we're claiming out of this code, you also have to do these additional efficiency package options. Choose something. There used to be a list. Put in better mechanical. Put in better lighting. Put in whatever. But it was not deemed to be equal. So now it's become a points. You have to get 10 points. And so it's broken up by the type of building and by climate zone. So maybe in Aspen, I'm not going to get a high credit. I'm not going to get as many points for air conditioning as I would for heating, right? But in climate zone 4, I might get a better get a better credit for my air conditioning. And so it breaks it down to make it more even by the type of building. Maybe office building is going to get some credit for better lighting, where they might not get credit for something else that isn't office. Right? So it's just trying to make it a little bit more even for climate zones and for types of buildings. And then there's an appendix AX, which is that here's how you can get to 0. It's kind of like, I would liken it to the path, like the ZEPI that's in the 2015, the IGCC. It's kind of like that. It's a new appendix that gives jurisdictions the option of a path to get to 0. So it'll be interesting to see how that gets used, but the new intent says we have to provide that no matter what. Real quick, residentially, you used to, the envelope, the major changes to the envelope is providing more options. You have a continuous only option. So in our climate zone, that would be if you want to do only continuous insulation prescriptively, you have to do an R30. Or you can do a cavity only is R30, sorry. Cavity only, you could do continuous only, or you could do a cavity plus continuous. There's different options in there, to tell you what you might have to do. So you do a R30, or you can do a 20+5, or if you're still using 2x4s, you could do a 13+10, or if you're doing all continuous, R20. So those are some new options. The U factors brought in, lowered the U factors in a couple climate zones, but really brought in for our climate zone in Denver area, the requirement for solar heat gain that's never been in the residential code for us before. Now there's a requirement that solar heat gain is 0.40. And then finally recognizing that windows, when you get those low U factor windows that are at high elevations, when you go over those passes, you lose some of the gas out of that window. Is it truly that U factor now? And so there is a footnote in the table that gives an allowance if you're in a high elevation for a different U factor. So some things there when it comes to blower door testing changes. We can thank Robby for a lot of these changes. He works so hard on the code, on the residential code. Blower door testing requirements changed a little bit. You still required 3 air changes per hour in our climate zone, but it's tradable. So if I use a performance path, I could trade some of that, better or worse. If I'm worse, then I have to make it up somewhere else. If I'm better, then I use it as a trade. There's an allowance for smaller buildings or apartments to do a CFM per square foot instead of that ACH 50. So there's some different things in there, which is really great. It's that whole section has improved. So I'm really thankful for that. Big change in duct leakage testing by removing a requirement or an exception. There used to be an exception that you didn't have to test ducts if they were in the conditioned space. That exception went away. So now all ducts are tested, whether they're in conditioned space or not. And so it does say, if it's in conditioned space, it can leak a little bit more than outside the conditioned space, but it still has to be tested. So that's in there. And duct leakage is also tradable. If I use performance, I can make it up, or I can use it as a credit if I'm doing really good. So that's in there. Mechanical equipment, it's hard to mandate efficient mechanical equipment because of the NACO rules, but our efficiency came in climate zone 6 and 7 have to use ERVs or HRVs. And there's a whole new section on testing your mechanical ventilation system that wasn't in there to make sure that those flow rates are right. The service water heating was updated a little bit. So we got a little bit of mechanical efficiencies in there. Lighting changed. So it used to be 90% of the lights had to be high efficacy. Now it's 100%. And then there's some lighting control requirements that have never been in there. Maybe some requirements for dimmers or occupancy sensors and that sort of thing. And paying attention to exterior lighting. The residential code was one paragraph on lighting before, and it just, was pretty vague. And so now it's really saying, let's look at all aspects of lighting. It did also bring in additional efficiency packages for residential. So you do everything that's a requirement of the code, and then you have to pick one of these options to get us the rest of the way there. The things like higher efficient mechanical equipment, higher efficient lighting, ERVs and HRVs, better blower door, better UAs, things like that, but you have to choose one. The difference between the additional efficiency package in residential and commercial is commercial, you only have to do it if you go prescriptive, but residential, it doesn't matter what path, even if you're going performance, doesn't matter what path, it's a requirement for all paths. It's a mandatory requirement. And then again, that appendix using the ERI path to get you to net zero. And so that came in in the 2021, and it'll forever be there and probably forever be changing. And it's a path to zero that you could do now, and then we're gonna have to add a path to zero by 2030. So some good stuff that came in, but also again, just things to keep in mind that we're gonna have to deal with, right? So what do I see happening here in Colorado? I help a lot of people through NORESCO, through the state of Colorado, through different people, just through jurisdictions to help them write their new codes. And so what do I see that, where are they going? Every single jurisdiction that I've helped to date that is moving to the 2021 is wanting some form of electrification ready. Are we ready for it? I don't know. I've talked to utilities who say, man, as long as it's an option, it's okay, but don't put it in, you don't mandate it because we're not ready. Well, the jurisdictions are ready, right? And so electric ready, maybe it's some form of, if you put in a gas appliance, you also have to make sure you put in the correct outlet next to it. If you're going to put in a gas water heater, you also need to make space for, a heat pump water heater that's going to take a little bit more space. Plan that ahead of time. What does that look like? Is there some solar ready stuff that we need to look at? Is there some EV charging things that we need to look at? But most jurisdictions are at a minimum put in at the time of construction. Don't wait and make somebody come in after the fact and try to make all of this work, right? Put in something for electrification ready. Electric vehicle charging, just about every jurisdiction is trying to do something with electric vehicle charging. EV ready, EV capable, they're all kind of defined terms, but what are they? And making sure that they have some, accessible electric vehicle charging spaces. And so they're really taking this seriously and figuring out all of that wording. Almost every jurisdiction is doing electric vehicle charging. Solar ready, there's already solar ready appendix in the code. Every jurisdiction is, just about every jurisdiction is adopting that. Some jurisdictions on the additional efficiency package options where you have to get a certain amount of points, they're saying, we don't want you to get 10, we want you to get 20, we want you to get 15, whatever. They're adding on to that and choosing more options. And I have some jurisdictions that are, instead of doing the new additional efficiency package in residential, they're opting in for making a point system for residential also, so that everything's equal by climate zone. Colorado has 4 climate zones, so we really want to, what we do in Aspen is not what we do down in the southeast corner of the state, right? So maybe making it a points option where it's a little bit more even across all 4 climate zones. The state has a requirement, or there's a law now that you can't amend the code to be less restrictive. What does that mean for us? I see some people going to the 18 and not the 21 because they're not quite ready for everything that we just talked about. And so they know they can't amend it, so they're going to the 18 and stopping. Some, though, are getting to the 21 and taking it to a whole new level, and anywhere in between. So I don't know. We can talk maybe in the panel about whether we think that law is making people not adopt newer codes, but really, with everybody's sustainability plans and climate action plans, most jurisdictions are going to the 2021 on steroids. Like they think the 2021 didn't get them far enough. And another trend that I'm seeing is residential window to wall ratio limits. I have some jurisdictions that are all now starting to talk about putting a limit on the amount of windows you can put in your residential building. And even if you don't put a limit, then maybe penalizing or incentivizing. Let's say we're going to incentivize less windows by saying, okay, you can do the code value for the U factor on the windows, but if you do too much windows, 20%, 30% window to wall area, then you have to do a better window, better solar heat gain, better U factor. I have a lot of jurisdictions wanting to do that. And I think our chapter is writing proposals for that for the 2024. So those are some of the trends that I'm seeing. I just want to go over those so that we can say, all right, what is it that what do we need to be talking about now? What are our concerns? What does it all mean for us? I think between the new intent written by ICC board of directors and the new requirements that we talked about and the trends where we see jurisdictions wanting to go, it's clear we're moving forward. We can never go back. Intent tells us we can never go back. We have to go forward. And so what does that mean for us? What do we need to be, how do we need to be finding solutions to make this work? Because it's coming. It's on our horizon. It's in front of our face right now. How do we get the utilities on board? I have a lot of jurisdictions saying, oh, I can't do complete solar because my utility can't keep up, or can't do electrification, the utility. How do we get those utilities on board? Do we write it and then say, okay, now you're gonna have to catch up? Or do we wait to write it until the utilities are ready? It's not happening, they're writing it. So what do we do for the utilities? What do we do for jurisdictions? Staffing levels maybe need to change. Do we need to get building departments and water departments and sustainability department, everybody working together and everybody taking on a portion of this? Because there's no way the building department could do all of it unless they add more people. What do you do there? What do we do for the builders, right? How do we teach the builders how to use this code and to move forward with it? Where can they get their trades? What can they do as performance or prescriptive? What do we need to do? We got to get the designers on board. Okay, designers, here's what's coming. How are you going to make it work? What kind of assemblies work best for you? How do you get a building envelope and a mechanical system to work together, not only for energy efficiency, but for humidification and indoor air quality, with the ventilation requirements? How do you design the building that works together for all of those things, right? And we need building owners to become aware of what they are supposed to be doing, what they are supposed to expect out of their building. If a homeowner knew they could expect all of these things, then the building department, the builder, the designer, they would all have to be doing it, right? Because the homeowner is expecting it. Right now, we don't have that expectation. We don't have that knowledge. So what do we need to do there? So there's a lot of things that we need to be looking at, and I'm going to leave it there and turn it back over to the panel to where maybe we can discuss some of these things and encourage you to put your questions in the chat of what you have for the 2021 code or how we're doing things moving forward.
Shauna, thank you so much. I liked hearing the high level changes, especially because that's where the rubber meets the road for the EBC contractors, manufacturers, and distributors. And I think it's interesting because there's so much happening and so much movement, and then there's a whole group in our, the majority that don't really understand how big this wave, this tidal wave, and how fast it's moving. And so that's what we want to talk about today. And what does that mean in the field, and what do we need to be doing? So with that, I want to introduce the rest of our panel. And what I'll do is just mention everyone's name, and then if you would just give a quick introduction of yourself and your background, that would be great. And we'll just go alphabetically with Erica DiLello from NORESCO first.
Great. Thank you, Patricia. Hi, everyone. Good morning. Thanks for joining us. I'm Erica DiLello, and I work for NORESCO. Been here for about a couple years now. My prior experience is energy modeling. So I transitioned into a project manager for building code compliance role at NORESCO on our codes and standards team.
And from my understanding, you spend a lot of time herding the cats and working on collaboration.
Oh yes, that's for sure. Between all of the SMEs and a few more here in Colorado, I have the pleasure of working with all of them and asking them lots and lots of questions to get the coordination done.
Fantastic. Okay, and Hope Medina from Shums Coda Associates. I don't know if I said Shums right. Oh, you need to turn your speaker on.
Okay, Kim, you did get it right. It is Shums Coda Associates. So
Okay.
I've had the distinct pleasure of being an inspector, a plans examiner, a permit tech, an instructor, consultant, dealing with the code. So like Shauna, we've had this great plethora of background that we bring forward, when we're talking about the codes. I am currently working with Shauna on the 2024 Commercial Consensus Committee for the IECC. I am the vice chair for the Sustainability Membership Council, and just a pleasure to be here, and I can't wait to have the discussion with this great group of people here.
Yeah, I think everyone's perspectives has a different angle, so I think it's going to be a great discussion. Next, introduce Jim Meyers from SWEEP, which is a Southwest Energy Efficiency Projects.
Hi, Jim Meyers here. SWEEP is one of the 6 regional energy efficiency organizations across the U.S. that are promoting the advancement of energy efficiency and now decarbonization, electrification, and so forth to municipalities and states, and supporting those organizations. Also working with Department of Energy and the labs, NREL, PNNL, and so forth. So I have had a background. Robby and I were HERS raters way back in the 90s when the HERS rating program came out in Colorado. So I did that. And then I worked for an Insulation Trade Association, covered a lot of the US, and worked with trades at that time, then transitioned over to SWEEP. Each of those times, even when I was doing HERS ratings, we were working on codes way back then. So I have participated.
Oh, Jim, you froze up. Jim, I don't know if you can hear me, but you froze up. So I'm probably going to move on to Robby real quick.
So I'll start while Jim's unfreezing.
It's climate change.
I'm Robby Schwartz with BuildTank. As Jim said, I come from, well, first from a building background. I worked for a builder, and then I was a partner at Energy Logic, left Energy Logic and created BuildTank. We're trying to be a practical building think tank to help move our industry forward. Shauna got me into the code world back in the 2015 cycle, and I've been trying to move that forward for builders and true practitioners of the code, people that are using the code in the field to be able to understand what they have to do and how we can create better buildings there. And then I get to do fun things like this, and I just wanted to make a shameless plug for my new podcast, the BuildTank BuildCast. So check it out.
Awesome. Well, great. I think the from what Shauna was talking about at the end of, what do we do? What's it going to take? The first question that I'd like to dive in a little bit deeper is, are the utilities ready for electrification, and cities and governments? And I know you all have great examples of what's happening in all different types of jurisdictions. And maybe we could start with Hope answering the first.
Well, I think it's on the radar for utilities. They're fully aware of the fact that, this is the direction that communities are looking towards. But if all the communities right now that Shauna and I are working on that are wanting to have electrification, if they all went on right now, I don't believe the utilities would be able to handle it in their current situation. Now, that doesn't mean that they aren't working, with steps towards being able to support that and being able to help facilitate that. But it's one of those, it's kind of a cautionary tale, because if you think about it, if the utilities are not prepared and they're not on board, then there's some dire consequences that can, manifest when you start talking about jurisdictions. A few years ago, in a jurisdiction outside of Colorado, I'm going to preface that and let you know I can't say what the jurisdiction name is on air, but they wanted to have full electrification, and they had the council on board, they had everybody on board. So they set a date, and they had basically full electrification within a year. They were able to get their entire jurisdiction up and going on that. The problem that manifested was the fact that the utilities were not prepared for that. They weren't involved in the process, and they weren't able to really keep up with it. So then they weren't able to generate it of their own terms. So then they're buying the energy from somewhere else. And what ended up happening is, before they decided to do their electrification, they started off at 3 cents a kilowatt. And then by the time this was all completed a year later, they were at 13 cents a kilowatt. So that's a drastic increase on a monthly, utility bill. And ultimately kind of what that did is, there were businesses that just weren't able to, stay in business basically. And so I think there needs to be a good partnership that happens, talk to your local utilities. It's not that, they don't want it to happen, but I think they do want to be a little bit more involved with it so they know where to, have that focus, because they can't do it all the way across the board, across the state. If they know this specific area, there's 4 jurisdictions looking at that, then they know, okay, well, it makes sense. Let's focus that area as our first jumping off point, and then they can move accordingly. So I think they really need to be a partner in the discussion.
Sorry, Jim, I just jumped in late, but that's true. So if you look at Denver, Denver has brought XL in because Denver said, we are going electric, new, very early, and existing buildings, all existing buildings in the 2030s. XL is part of all of those discussions and committees and so forth. So to make it work, the utility has to, if electrification is where they're going. So the utility can provide insight to how they could move forward, whether it's a phased-in approach, new, and then existing, or whatever. But and then in Colorado, there was a bill that passed earlier this year about beneficial electrification, moving beneficial electrification forward. So it's coming in Colorado, but whether it's at an IOU such as Excel, investor-owned utility, or whether it's at a co-op such as Mountain Park Electric that has everything electric program. They're up in Winter Park and Fraser area. It's all different, but they all have to come together and work together.
Question real quick, when you're talking about Denver, Jim, by when? Like, do you know when they plan on enacting 2021 codes with net zero? Is it net zero new buildings only going forward?
So they have net zero, and they also have electrification in that. And I'll have to look. 2024 is what's coming
Jim,
in my mind.
I can chime in there. I'm working actively on the Denver codes, and the trajectory is to meet net zero energy by 2027, and then the performance verification to come in by 2030. So the actual building and the performance will have to actually meet and be verified by that point, by 2030. And so it will be the 2021 codes. Denver will keep amending as new codes come out. So 2024, they'll develop amendments for that increase the stringency and so forth.
So is it 20, and I'm thinking just from the field's perspective, it seems like that 2024 is going to be a big shift in the codes and big changes, and they need to be thinking of, what do they need to be thinking about to be ready to respond to those big changes in 2024?
Yeah, definitely. So with net zero energy and how Denver defines net zero energy, they look at 4 different pillars. First, energy efficiency, then demand flexibility, renewables, and I believe there's one more, and electrification, of course. So it all builds off of each other. So those are the 4 pillars that Denver's trying to hit really hard right now. And then as those are developed, we're creating proposals actually right now. I know Shauna and Robby are working with me on that. And so I think I just saw a question in the chat on when the 2021 codes will be adopted, and that'll happen. We're looking at code hearings starting in the beginning of 2022, and those will be carried out through about May is the current schedule. Great.
I don't know, Robby, do you want to comment on that from like the builder developer perspective? Are they even really aware? I think there's a small core group that's in the EEBC, because that's what we all do. But then generally, what's that landscape look like?
Yeah, I think that the majority of them are not really aware the direction that a city like Denver is trying to go. They are aware that jurisdictions are beginning the process of adopting the 2021 ICC. There is a thought just from that perspective that it's a big jump. But what they're learning, which I guess is maybe an unintended consequence of the structure of the code, is that they can actually they can use the more flexible compliance pathways and trade off and not really do that much more than they have to do to increase the efficiency, but that cost of construction might go up because there are things that are the code changed from this mandatory language to a requirement language. It means the same thing. You still have to do it. And there's some things that changed there, like Shauna was talking about, lighting controls has been brought into the residential sector. So they have to add these lighting controls, regardless of, how much energy that actually might save, but they're concerned because it's a cost increase there.
Mhm.
So there seem to be more concerned about that than their ability to comply with the overarching energy code, because they can trade it off. In essence.
Mhm. Now, we're going a little down this rabbit hole and then we'll get back to some other questions. I participated in RMI, had 14 cities that they were working with and doing sessions on how to get to net zero and move their cities along. And there's approximately 14 cities that have sustainability and climate action committees, and they're working on everything we're talking about right now. And so out of that, I don't know if you have any perspective on those 14 leaders that are moving towards, getting to net zero buildings in their community and electrification. I think there's probably 4 or 5, I'm guessing, that are moving forward like Denver is, that they're making that statement and they're going fast, versus the other ones are trying to figure out how they would do it. And they've set goals as cities, but they don't really know how to get there yet. So any comments on just looking at the whole state from our contractors' perspective of the cities they're working in, how this is happening?
I mean, I would jump in and say there's probably more than 14.
Yeah.
Maybe that, that's what's working with RMI, but there's more than 14. Just about every jurisdiction that has decided to go to the 2021 is looking at some sort of going a little bit further, bringing in the electrification, bringing in EV charging, bringing in, make more points, or we want to be just a little bit better than our neighbor, or we want to be just a little bit further. And so a lot of them are going further. I think that almost every jurisdiction now has a sustainability department, truly. And so I see that. What I don't see is the connection between two things. One, sometimes there's not a connection between the building department and the sustainability department, and they need to work better together, and we're working hard on that. But also between what's going on at that government level to its community, to the builders, to the and so I know at the state level and at sweep level, there's a lot of emphasis on educating. Here's what's coming, here's how you can be prepared. And Robby does a lot of educating for builders and things on here's what's coming, here's how you need to be prepared. But I don't think there's a huge emphasis on the jurisdiction itself going out there and saying, hey, this is what is coming. It usually is like, oh, we're getting ready to adopt a code in a month, now you have a say so, instead of, like Denver is really good about bringing everybody with them. Most jurisdictions wait until they've just about gotten it all written, got the buy-in from council, got everything figured out, and then say, hey builders, here's what we're doing. And so that's what I see, and hopefully that we can make a difference in that.
I would agree. I think one of the more successful, or for a jurisdiction to be successful, there really has to be that interdepartmental conversation that happens. And I mean, as Shauna said, there are a lot of places now that are starting to really work with that. It used to be the building department was an island within the city, and now there's not. There's ferries coming in and out to, all the various people. And I think one of the really successful stories that we could have is Denver, but there's also, I want to bring up Louisville for their 2021 code adoption. The only code that they're adopting is going to be the 2021 IECC. They've made it more stringent. They brought in electrification ready because they've been having those conversations with Excel. They had PV readiness already included in their 2018 adoption. So they're moving that a little bit forward with this. They're adding the EV parking. But what they did this go around, which I thought was great when I was working with them, was the fact that they brought in their sustainability coordinator. So she was involved in the code amendments. And so she got to dive into it and understand a little bit more of what, building is involved. And when it came down to or where the EV parking was going to reside, they decided that that didn't make sense to put it in the building code. It makes sense to start talking about it under their planning code. And so it went onto the planning side, which planning was involved in the process to do their adoption for the 2021. And they brought their builders organization in. So they really had a great collaboration of people that were involved in it. And so having that buy-in has really moved the process along, I think, smoother, and they have a real good set game plan as far as who's addressing what, who's looking at what. And they their amendments have already gone to the attorneys, and it's, from my understanding, it's getting ready to be put on to the council's agenda. So
I want to add to Hope. That's awesome, Hope, and we've been following Louisville. So Sweet's been working with cities. We cover 6 Southwest states. We are working with cities who have this interest for electrification, EV infrastructure, and so forth. My experience working with those communities, they are very interested in having product manufacturers participate. They are very interested, HERS raters participate, and distributors, key HVAC installers, companies in their area. They want all of those people to participate, and of course the builders and architectural community. But they are eager to have them participate, to learn what is their challenges, or is it a real simple step forward, what it is. So I'm just bringing that out to all of those EEBC members, HVAC distributors, insulation, and so forth, that these communities would like your participation and like your knowledge to understand what will be required and how they can move forward to reach these goals that Hope was just talking about.
I just was going to add as well that Erica can probably talk to this better than I, but I don't think the jurisdictions understand the scope and how it impacts each of those departments that Hope was talking about, and it goes down even to like the forestry department and everything. So you might talk a bit about that a little bit, Erica. But also, I think their outreach to the community, they're only hearing from a segment of their community, and they're not necessarily in sync with everybody in that community. And like all change, it's going to hit those people that aren't involved the hardest. They're going to come back and say, I never knew that this was coming. And even though there's all this outreach, they're still going to say that. It happens, with builders all the time. It's going to happen with the general public. And kind of a funny or interesting one to me was we started talking about electrification, and then we're getting into, everyone's going to start complaining because I have to give up my gas range. And those small things are going to impact the community.
Yeah, I would just add, Robby, we're seeing a lot of different task forces pop up. With Denver, I think you can still apply to the technical committee to be part of the code hearings. The goal is that we are capturing all of the stakeholders' voices on task forces. So I fully encourage trades, engineers, manufacturers to apply for those types of positions. And then in respect to the coordination that kind of happens behind the scenes, Denver specifically, they have the Denver Green Code. And so that's kind of like their pilot code that they use to then filter down to future building amendments. So if you want a little bit of an inkling into what's coming, that's a really good resource to see, oh, okay, if they're thinking about, I just wrote a proposal for passive solar. And so just kind of queuing in to what else is coming and the coordination that does happen behind the scenes. There's a lot of departments, especially at Denver, that we've had to coordinate and loop in, either with zoning, forestry, and different things to kind of see how these proposals all work together.
And I would advocate for our members who are everybody that you said, dealers, auditors, engineers, distributors, manufacturers. It's a big time commitment. And if there was some way, if you see a process that you can get that type of feedback through versus having monthly 2-hour meetings, that's a lot for a contractor, especially to commit to. And so you're going to get, again, you're going to get the believers that are going to participate. We've got to hear from the non-believers that are probably 70% of the buildings going up or more, let's say 80, So, and if anyone has some examples of some good processes or thoughts on that, would be helpful. Any ideas?
I mean, really, like right now, the state, funds us to help people and to do webinars. We do a webinar every Wednesday on different code things, and so it's a 1-hour quick webinar. There are a bunch of resources on the state's website that we've all contributed to, and I think that what would be good is if those resources and webinars were made available, which they are, to the contractors, and they see something that really strikes their attention, then they could contact one of us and say, how do I work on this aspect with you? Because I mean, it's like me, I can't work on every single thing out there. I have to focus my attention sometimes. And so if somebody says, oh, wow, you just mentioned this whole lighting controls in residential buildings, I have a say-so about that. I need more information about that. I want to work on a change about that. Any one of us would be happy to work with you. Also, I love on the state's website now, there's a resource where you can go in and ask a code question, and it sends us a ticket, and one of us has to answer it, and quite quickly and which I'm really great at. But anyway, so we answer a question, but you couldn't even, it doesn't have to necessarily be a question. You could say, hey, I'm concerned about this. I'm a builder. I need info on this, and we can get you there. Or I want to work with you on this. We can get you there. It doesn't have to be a 3-hour or a 2-hour meeting on something. It can be look through the resources. You have a question, look through the code. You have a question, you want to change something, we want your changes. Right.
And I kind of do a little plug that we're going to talk about the action groups, the committees that the EEBC is starting, and we have so far, I'll talk about it later, but a lighting, HVAC and heat pump committee, as well as an insulation air sealing. If there's any other committees you highly recommend, but this might be a focus that we need them to come up with. When you said controls, I'm like, the lighting committee has been talking about controls and looking for rebates from the utilities for that. And so that I was like, ding, 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 when you were talking about that, going, oh, this is maybe something that they need to take on, but we don't typically think of codes being part of our discussion in those.
I think I'm on, well, you will, I'm on some of those things. Like I think the lighting one is at 4 o'clock today. I think I'm going to sit in on that. So I definitely will bring codes into the conversation.
That's awesome. I hope, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, when we were talking about, involvement from, contractors and manufacturers, I think one of the things that would be, a great benefit to everyone is if we had more manufacturers that offered to, provide training, for lack of a better word, of how to install their product correctly. I remember years ago, we had house wrap representatives. We had 2 come down and do a training. They talked about how to install theirs, and the other respectively talked about how to install theirs. Then we went out into the field and got to see how it was. And it was great because, they talked about, well, if this was our product, you'd have to overlap, 18 inches, and they only overlapped 6 inches here. But sometimes just having that little bit of information from the manufacturers or the, product representative about how it should be installed is, kind of half the battle as far as, getting to the energy efficiency. You talk about, air barriers right now. Air barriers are, a big thing when it comes to the 2021, because you got the, envelope verification, you've got the, basic blower door testing that's going on for, commercials, and air barriers is really going to kind of make or break you. And quite often you see on the plans that, oh, well, we're just going to use the building wrap for it. That's great. It may have been tested to be both the water resistant barrier and an air barrier, but to be installed as an air barrier, you have to go through this installation process. And there's that misstep that kind of happens, and then it goes out into the field. And so having some of that information about this is how you do it, and this is the correct way to do it, I think would really benefit the building community to, help the jurisdictions to get to where their goals are wanting to be.
I would just add to that, Hope. So I have been really excited about the Colorado Code Helpline, because we're actually that data to inform what webinars and resources we develop. So one of the things that we've heard specifically from Summit County is that they're moving towards zero energy ready homes. And so it was piloted over the last year. And one of the concerns that we've heard from contractors and tradesmen is that, cost-wise, how do we get there with reasonably within the budget? And so, or how do we install these things properly? And so developing those kinds of resources, I'm working with Robby right now, and he's working on creating these short video clips of what a proper installation looks like of continuous insulation, or a comparison between HRVs and ERVs. So these short video clips that are probably like between about 10 minutes and 15 minutes that trades can just reference in the field is kind of the goal there.
No, that's a great point. There's a couple things to tease out of that. When you were saying air sealing and the envelope hope is important. I think that we need to reach out to insulation and air sealing contractors, because I don't think they realize that the opportunity that's coming with the transition and the new codes, that it's opening up more air sealing that's going to have to take place. And so I think there's an opportunity for growth in the insulation air sealing side to really deliver, and knowing how to do it right and installing is critical. And also I see in the chat here a question. It says, curious about manufacturer engagement, HVAC ramping up, heat pump production, et cetera. Are they getting on board nationally, or is this overall demand too small to impact the change yet? And I could start with a comment that the EEBC is working with SWEEP and 14 other organizations, and it's comprised of 4 utilities, 3 cities on the quality install committee that we've created, and we're focusing specifically on the heat pump side, as well as who am I missing? The cities, the utilities. But the point is that we're all working together on what we're putting into the marketplace and how do we help accelerate heat pump adoption in the state, and looking at those types of things you're talking about and how we're all delivering it more in a unified message and working together. So that is brewing. So there's an example of a group. It's called the Beneficial Electrification League. That started about a year ago, and we have all those organizations working together on how do we accelerate, and have been talking with specifically the distributors, because we believe distributors are, the critical to mobilizing the supply chain, and how do we transition HVAC, into heat pumps as a part of this electrification transition. So that going on in the marketplace too.
I can tell you that at the national level, definitely manufacturer engagement, right? You cannot go to, especially an energy code hearing, where half of the room isn't manufacturers, either making sure that whatever happens in the code doesn't leave them out of the market, or that, hey, we've got this new technology, we need to get in here. And so definitely manufacturers are playing a part. I mean, I think I just got an email while we were doing this from somebody that's on here saying, hey, I have some proposals for the national level. How do I do it? So yeah, we definitely have involvement at the national level. I think we have less involvement at the local level. And so I'm glad, like when we did the Denver proposals, there was some manufacturers there that actually came to the code hearings last cycle and said, hey, we want these things. Some of them went in, some of them didn't, but they were involved, they were engaged. And so I think that we need to, I love that EEBC has this kind of avenue where they can be more involved at a more state and local level, but they're definitely involved at the national level.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of state and local movement on heat pumps right now, and it's brewing, and I think that there is a lot of collaborative effort on transitioning to heat pumps, because especially with the utilities and the cities, they know that to get to these net zero goals with the 2021 codes, that is the critical product that is going to get them to 80% carbon-free electric grids by 2030. That is the goal. I'm going to show that slide later, which may be a nice frame up of what we're all looking at, how we have to mobilize all together to get to those goals. Any other comments on that before we move on?
I would just agree that there's huge interest in heat pumps. There's lots of education going on there. There's also a very well, they're able to kind of step their way into it right now, because they're pretty critical to install in ADUs and smaller units now. because they impact the thermal envelope less, and they can pass their blower door test actually, rather than using a traditional furnace that's located in the garage or whatnot. And then I was at the EEBC conference earlier this week, and people are talking about supply chain issues still. And I guess there's like 37 container ships off the coast of LA, and a lot of them have heat pumps on them, and they can't get them. There's definitely a lot of demand. Yeah,
to add some context to that too, it's certain manufacturers that are having more problems than others. And so it's not across the board that you can say it depends on the manufacturer. And so they're kind of cycling, and so there is availability, but it's dependent on the manufacturer. It's not across the board. It's whatever shipping or delivery mechanisms that are being held up at different periods. Yeah, that's a great comment. Just to also on the resources page, we're going to provide to you at the end. I think we'll add on there Love Electric. So the Beneficial Electrification League has put together a Why Heat Pumps and Electrification website, and the Colorado Energy Office and SWEEP work together heavily on that. And there is a link in there that you can go in and look up all the heat pump rebates with every utility in the state really quickly. And also, I don't think there's code information on there. Maybe we should put that jurisdiction sheet on there, where the jurisdictions are at. But it's for the community, it's for the public. So there is a resource, a third-party resource that can be validating and used. But that link on there does link up to all the heat pump rebates in the state.
I think
finding a contractor.
Another good resource that we could add also is the Colorado chapter of ICC puts on an educational institute every March for a week. And so we have 65 classes over the course of that week. And so I have to set up 55 of those classes. And so I have created a path. I mean, there's always an energy path where we have energy code issues talked about, but also created this path of electrification. Jim's going to do a class on electrification. I'm going to have somebody come in doing a heat pump class, air source, heat pumps for these cold climates. That's going to be a class in there. And so just taking all of the hot topics that are happening right now and providing classes, and those classes are open to anybody, and they're pretty reasonable. So I will give you that link as well to put on the resource page.
Okay, great. And we're going to have to wrap up here. Is there any more comments, or maybe we should say, what are the next steps next forward? I think we're talking about next steps a little bit. Is there any other? That's a great example of something available. Any other comments before we maybe take more? There's a couple more questions.
Another resource available is Thrive Home Builders has partnered with EEBC again to create their Ultimate Zen model home demonstration house out at Stapleton. So you can go and you can see air handler heat pump there. You can see water heat pumps. You can see convection cooking. You can see all those things in action.
Great. And I was going to read in the chat from Dave Petrie, in order to help construction trades transition better equipment, design and installation practices, i.e. more time and cost, there needs to be the broad sustainable public education campaign to reset homeowner costs, expectations on home systems that historically they have expected to be inexpensive. Any comments on that?
I mean, it's true. It goes back to like what I was talking about. You need to reset your homeowners' expectations. Right? They need to, first of all, there's this disconnect between what they want to pay for a home, but what they expect it to do. And so they just need to be more involved. And we definitely need an education campaign on it. Here's what your home can do. Here's what the code says it could do. Is it doing that? Are you expecting it? Get involved in your design. Get involved in the checking it out as it's being constructed, and have a say-so in how it's being built. Get the homeowner buy-in with the contractor buy-in and the designer buy-in. It's like you want jurisdictions, every department in the jurisdiction to work together, but what about the designer, the builder, and the homeowner working together? It's no longer one of those things where you just say, okay, designer, here's the house that I want you to build. I want it to be 4 bedrooms and I want it to be da da da. No, it is, hey, it's going to save me energy. My next energy bill is not going to put me out of my next mortgage payment. I am going to, save some water. I want a good design, and they have to get involved in it so that they have the buy-in. If they have the say-so, they're willing to pay the more of the price. And so that I've been talking to Department of Energy for years about quit doing a campaign on a high efficient refrigerator. Do one that says, homeowners, here's what you can expect, and you should demand that to meet expectations.
Well, and I think going along those lines, the great thing that's happening is we have a new generation coming into the home buying market. And that particular generation grew up with the concept of climate change and what energy efficiency is, and that, you should recycle. They had that all coming along, and they are expecting that now. You can go back and look at the National Realtors Association, and it has the home buying trends, and it'll break it down, and you'll be able to see, what were the people looking for, what were some of the things, and they now have a section in there that talks about sustainability and energy efficiency, breaking it out. What are you looking for? And the number one thing on almost all the age groups is the fact for their heating and cooling costs. And basically they don't want to pay an arm and a leg to heat and cool their buildings. So the nice thing is we do have that coming into the marketplace, but I think there has to be a good outreach, as Shauna said, to further that education. Okay, so you want to have, a better thermal envelope. Okay, so what exactly does that mean? And so having that type of education, is pretty, I think, important. And it's something that's already happening out there. I know somebody, she's my adopted daughter. She went out, she was buying her house for the first time. She did all this research. She found the actual insulation certificate to the house. It didn't meet the thermal envelope requirements. Their above grade walls did not meet what was in the code that they had adopted at the time. And she called me and said, can't I make them put the correct insulation value in there? And I'm like, yeah, that's not how it goes. And she was like, but it's the law, it's the law. And I'm like, it's not really the law. But the point was, she ended up walking away from the house. She loved the house, but because the thermal envelope, just the above grade walls were not, what was in the adopted code at the time, she walked away. And I think we're going to start seeing more of that manifesting with some of the younger buyers that are coming in.
Especially at the price you have to pay for a new house.
Yeah.
You better get something out of it.
Yeah, she wasn't going to pay an arm and a leg. She liked both of them,
Unfortunately, most people don't know anything that you just described. We are still in that period, and I don't see any change in it where it's the largest investment we ever make with the least amount of knowledge about the product. Yeah. And it's going to take, like Shauna said, I guess this is sustained PSA that's a 20-year campaign or something to change that.
I guess we're going to have to wrap up soon. What is the number one thing that you think drives the changes then? Is it like the codes or legislation or the people, the movement of the building department? Just curious, what is it that, or is it kind of all of them happening together?
I think quite often the building department is an afterthought to, some of the goals that are, wanting to happen. And I think that's just because they want to do these goals and not realize that it falls onto the shoulders of the building department to, bolster, quite a few of those. But I think quite honestly, the first place it has to happen is, I think the community, the constituents there have to be wanting it, because they really can make or break it. They can, enlist the council members or the elected officials to say, this is what we're looking for, and they'll support it and they'll, help to facilitate it. But if they are not on board, they're one of the biggest roadblocks for any community to want to, adopt newer codes or, go beyond or try to do something else. I think, quite often people focus on, the builders and the building community. And while they should be involved and they have a place in it, I think it's the community itself that can make or break your efforts in what you want.
I agree with Hope on that. One additional thing to look at is product manufacturers have, looking at the whole picture, have driven it. So look at lighting. the LED, the lighting industry, and the controls, lighting controls. Those costs have dropped so dramatically that it's a no-brainer for those that want to develop codes. Let's put this in the code because it's not $1,000 increase in this commercial building or this residential to do controls or lighting, 100% efficacy in lighting. And the other one I wanted to mention was windows, fenestration, residential. Back in the Great Recession, there was tax incentives that came out, and it was Energy Star new windows. That drove the U factor down. That drove the solar heat gain down. That's all you'd see in the marketplace for sale because that's where you got the incentives. And so then what happened? Then the codes followed because those fenestration was already in the marketplace, and the code said, well, this is already being installed. Let's put this in the code, and then let's go beyond for those that wanted to drive more efficiency into the code. So I think it's all of the players that, and it depends on community by community and state by state as to their opportunity for change.
Yeah, fantastic. Any other comments? If Nick, if you would put up if there's any more questions, please pop that in the chat. And would you put the resources page up real quick, just so everybody can see, because after today, we'll send out the recording from this meeting as well as the slide decks. So I just wanted you to take a look at that. There's a lot. And so some of the things that we talked about today, I just wanted to do, if there's a couple of things that you guys would like to call out on this list, I think that I was surprised the Energy Code Adoption Toolkit, what's actually in that. And then from a contractor's perspective, I like the jurisdiction code tracking spreadsheet that all of you keep updated on a regular basis, and it's provided by the Colorado Energy Office. But it's great because it says the code level of every jurisdiction in the state. Did I frame that up correctly, Jim? Okay, great. Would you guys like to call out any particular items based on our panel discussion today?
I would like to bring up the Sustainability Membership Council's energy efficiency and carbon reduction page. It's on ICC's website. It's a location that has quite a bit of information. There's, a tab that just deals with adoption of codes, how do you gain compliance? And then there's focus on, net zero energy. Then there's a focus on carbon reduction. And it just provides a location that kind of encompasses almost all the topics that we discussed today, and also refers you back to things the RIOs, and says your state may have an energy office that has available tools for you. So it really tries to give you the information, at least guide you to a direction of where it may be a benefit for you.
Okay. Anything else?
Yeah, I love the state's website and that toolkit. I think we've all worked on it, and the stuff that, like you say, the stuff that's on there, the resources that are on there are amazing. It gives you the significant changes to all the codes. It gives you some studies, some cost impact statements, all the stuff that you'd have to search a million websites to, you could find it in one place. I love that. But I would draw also your attention to SWEEP's website, because with all the jurisdictions that are going to electrification and to EV charging and those kinds of things, I can tell you that a lot of them are starting with the information they find on SWEEP's website. There's, code language, and there's what other people are doing and what's working and what's not. They have a very good website, or a very good site for information, especially that EV information that's on there. A lot of people start there. So if you want to see what's up and coming, what you should know about EV stuff getting into the code, that is a great website on what people are doing. They have fact sheets and code language already written that people could just go in there and take. So that's, to me, a huge resource right now.
To piggyback off of that, definitely use SWEEP's website quite a bit for all of that code language available on there. But I would like to just put in a little plug for, we're actually, Colorado Energy Office is kicking off their Wednesday webinar series next week. And Robby is doing a presentation on what an all-electric home looks like. So if you are interested in attending that, you can find the information on the Code Adoption Toolkit, as well as all of our other previous recordings of webinars. And so Excel and CEO are coordinating to pick what the topics are and kind of build off of each other. So be sure to check those out.
Great. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Super appreciate you guys being here. This has been fantastic to get a handle on, all that information in one place, and super appreciate it because I know EBA's going on, and then I think you guys are either leaving or involved in the code hearings, for writing the 2020 codes and getting on airplanes tonight. And so thank you for being here, and I look forward to maybe working on some resources for our members based on what we've talked about. So this resource page will be sent out to everyone who is on the call after the meeting. And with that, thank you very much. And we are going to go on to our next topic, which is an update on regulatory affairs and utilities. So we're going to switch to the other side of how we're all working together in the EBC to also impact, those as well. So I'm introducing Casey Cornelio from Dietz and Davis, which is the counsel for EEBC on our legal side.
Great. Thank you, Patricia. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to share my screen to pull up my presentation. Okay.
Yeah, that's great.
Great. So yes, hello, good morning. My name is Casey Cornelio, and I'm an attorney with the law firm Dietz and Davis in Boulder. I'm actually coming to you live from Louisville, Colorado, with their great codes. And I'll be providing a brief regulatory update for everyone regarding some of the proceedings that have either just wrapped up or are happening right now at the PUC, and one that's also on the horizon. Great. So the first case I want to talk about is the Public Service Phase 2 rate case that just wrapped up at the PUC, and a final commission decision was issued recently. So a little bit of context: late last year, the PUC approved time of use rates, a rate schedule for Excel, and the peak period for that will be 3 p.m. to 7 p.m. Monday through Friday, and then the shoulder period will be weekdays 1 to 3 p.m. And so in this rate case that just wrapped up, Excel proposed to replace the existing inverted block rate, or the IBR, which was the primary residential rate, Schedule R, with a seasonal flat rate structure. And Excel claimed that the IBR can inhibit beneficial electrification, and that this SFR rate will assist with the transition to time of use. And I'll be talking about the rollout of the advanced meters that go along with the TOU rates in another slide. But the recommended decision in this case ultimately approved Excel's proposal to replace the existing IBR rate with the seasonal flat rate. And EEBC members who I know were in attendance this morning, SWEEP and EOC, they fought hard to have the IBR rate as the optional opt-out rate that would be alternative to the TOU rate after the customers receive their advanced meters. But ultimately, the commission agreed with both the ALJ and the company in this case to replace the IBR with SFR. So Schedule R will serve as the default rate for customers of Excel waiting to receive their advanced meters as this rollout is taking place. And then they'll be transitioned to the TOU rate once they get their advanced meter. So switching things up from the rate making to demand side management. Right now at the PUC is the Black Hills Electric 2022 to 2024 DSM plan, and they filed that this spring. And the company's proposed plan is comprised of 3 categories: residential, commercial and industrial, and special programs. And the company notes that if its proposed DSM goals can be met in this new plan, it will result in Black Hills achieving more than 50% of Colorado's statutory greenhouse gas reduction requirement by the end of 2024, so by the end of the plan, and ahead of schedule to meet the 2028 statutory deadline. And so under this new proposed plan, new program changes include residential electrification programs and pilots, the launch of an online marketplace, the creation of an umbrella program to address commercial and industrial DSM solutions, a new demand response program to address economic interruptions in light of the February 2021 President's Day weekend extreme cold weather event. And so where we're at with this case is the company filed their proposed plan this spring, and recently some of the intervening parties in this case, which also include EEBC members, SWEEP and EOC, some of these parties filed answer testimony. And so while these are just proposals and they haven't been adopted into the plan, just based on where we're at in the proceeding, I just wanted to briefly highlight some of these proposals that I thought would be of interest to EEBC members. So SWEEP proposed that the company should do significantly more to promote the adoption of heat pump water heaters among the roughly 11,000 households in the Black Hills' service territory in southern Colorado. And for air source heat pumps, SWEEP took the position that the company should increase its incentives, especially in comparison to air conditioners. And that's because SWEEP does not believe that the beneficial electrification measures proposed by the company go far enough to build the nascent market for heat pumps and heat pump water heaters, and as well as all electric home and businesses. And overall, SWEEP in their answer testimony took the position that this new plan should evolve to promote heat pumps instead of central air conditioners. And just in general, many of the parties are requesting increased energy savings goals under the plan and would like around 22 gigawatt hours per year, which is a little bit higher than what the company proposed in their initial application. And then two other parties, the state agencies. So recently the Office of Consumer Counsel has been renamed to the Utility Consumer Advocate. And they are allowed to now under statute to take into account emissions reductions and environmental justice. So their mission as a state agency has evolved a little bit. So in their answer testimony in this case, they said that the plan should maintain incentives for electric air conditioners at the levels of the previous DSM plan that's currently in place, but that the incentives for evaporative coolers should be increased by $100 for the first two categories, and then $200 for the whole house cooler. And the UCA also suggested that the Energy Star room air conditioner incentive should be eliminated from the plan, and that the plan should expand to focus on both residential and C&I demand response. And specifically for the residential class, the UCA has proposed a thermostat control program that would utilize smart thermostats to control electric air conditioners, and perhaps also a whole house evaporative cooler program, as well as residential water heater control program. And then the last party I want to discuss is staff of the Public Utilities Commission. And they suggested in their answer testimony that the commission should order Black Hills to include a residential DR program for this new plan, because reductions to residential peak demand would be particularly valuable in the case of Black Hills, whose electric rates are some of the highest in Colorado in terms of price, and whose customer base is disproportionately income qualified. And DR staff takes the position that these DR programs would be a tool that could help enable residential ratepayers to reduce their contribution to system peaks and thereby reduce their cost burden on the system. And so staff had proposed that the company should include either a DLC smart thermostat cooling program or a DLC central AC program, as that party takes a position that those are both appropriate and cost effective. So the hearing in this case is a couple weeks away. It's going to take place in October, and so we don't know yet whether any of those DR or EE measures or suggestions will be incorporated into the plan, just based on where we're at in the proceeding. But we do expect the plan to ultimately be approved and modified on some level, and it should be implemented in early to mid 2022. And we'll definitely be monitoring this docket and what that final plan looks like for you all. Next slide. So the next case I wanted to, oh, sorry, I think I skipped 2 slides. There we go. Okay, so next we're kind of going back to those TOU rates and those advanced meters that I briefly touched upon in the phase 2 electric case that just wrapped up. So as I'm sure most of you know, Xcel intends to deploy 1.6 million advanced meters, which actually began this summer as a central part of the company's $612 million AEGIS initiative. And on June 16th, so earlier this summer, Xcel filed an application for approval to amend its CPCN for its Advanced Grid Intelligence and Security Initiative, which is shortened to AEGIS. And originally the filing for the AEGIS initiative was presented as an application back in fall of 2016 to implement advanced metering infrastructure along with grid intelligence that enables more interactivity and data sharing with customers, as well as the integration of more distributed resources to the grid. But in that time, Xcel has progressed forward on implementing the components of the settlement from that 2016 filing. However, the technology of the advanced meters did not stand still in time, and it hasn't advanced. And as a result of that, the commission had required Xcel to file a new application to evaluate these new capabilities. And Xcel ultimately went with the company Itron for selection as its meter vendor. And with these more advanced technology that was a part of this contract, these meters will have the potential for distributed or DI intelligence, and within the budget that was originally approved in the Aegis settlement. And so in this application, they're going to be amending this, the CPCN in order to have the commission approve these new features of the advanced meters, and that includes the home area network, or the HON, and these distributed intelligence, or DI, capabilities. And the following parties were granted intervention in this proceeding, which is still in its early stages. Trial staff of the commission, the Office of the Utility Consumer Advocate, formerly the OCC, Mission Data, Western Resource Advocates, Utilid Data, Itron, which is the meter vendor, and COSA and SIA, which is the Colorado Solar and Storage Association, and the Solar Energy Industries Association, and they regularly intervene together jointly. And then there is actually a technical conference for this case that's going to be held in early October. And what's great about the PUC is, and the fact that it's remote right now, is that you could tune into these remote hearings, and please contact me if you're interested in tuning into this technical conference. You can just stream it from your computer. Which is, yeah, so that should be interesting. And then answer testimony in this case will be filed in November, and then there'll be a mid-February 2022 hearing. And so I know a lot of these components of the advanced grid and the AMI are really important to EEBC members. So we'll be monitoring this case to see what findings the commission makes that will affect the market development for smart meters. And then on my next slide, I just wanted to show the smart meter installation map. As I said, this summer, the company began to install smart meters on the Front Range. And they'll be installing about 15,000 homes and businesses a week, which is exciting. And then starting in Denver, Aurora, and the surrounding suburbs. So the orange little marks are where the meters are being installed right now in Q3 of 2021. And then beginning from October to December, some of those other jurisdictions will also be getting their smart meters installed. And in total, about 395,000 advanced meters are slated to be installed by the end of 2021 across all of these cities and towns. And then almost all of the 1.6 million Colorado customers that will be getting these advanced meters across the Xcel service territory will have their smart meters by the end of 2023. So the next case I wanted to talk about is the new electric rate case. Xcel has been very busy at the PUC and has kept regular attorneys like myself really busy with all of these dockets. But this summer, Xcel filed a staggered phase 1 and phase 2 rate review case. And the phase 1 component of that case is the revenue requirement. And then the phase 2 is the cost allocation and rate design. And so in this new filing, Public Service says it is seeking a total increase in base rate revenues of $470 million. So a significant increase. And 67% of the class cost of service is related to costs of programs that have already been approved in other proceedings. And those include the past Aegis docket that we talked about, wildfire mitigation, community resilience, transportation, electrification, and innovative clean technology programs. And so if approved, these new rates would result in a pretty substantial monthly bill increase of 13% for residential customers and about the same for small commercial customers. And this comes out to about a roughly $10, or I rounded up, a $9.50 monthly increase for residential customers, and for commercial customers, about a $15 monthly bill increase. And there's a large number of parties involved in this proceeding, and it's set for a 2-week hearing in mid-January of 2022. And so this docket tracks with the Aegis docket, and you know, the investment that the company is making, and therefore that the ratepayers have to pick up the bill for these advanced meters that will enable a lot of interesting things to happen with the grid. But at the same time, there's some pretty big rate impacts as a part of this case. So we'll be monitoring this docket as well. And then last but not least, I just wanted to briefly touch on, go back to the DSM context and mention that on the horizon, we have the Xcel strategic issues docket. And there's a need for these periodic strategic issues proceedings because things can change so quickly in the demand side management context that there needs to be the commission needs to regularly revisit key assumptions and seek guidance and impose guidance to the utilities and get approval from the commission on how to shape these plans. And so these filings are designed for the PUC to re-examine and approve overall objectives such as energy savings, goals, and budgets, and how utilities should structure DSM incentives in this design of these future DSM plans. And so in March of 2022, which I realized it felt really far away not too long ago, but now I'm realizing it's only 6 months away that public service will be required to file their strategic issues docket. And EEBC will plan to hopefully intervene and participate in this docket. And so that is coming up pretty quickly. And yeah, we'll look forward to evaluating the company's application filing and where EEBC members you know, would like to give input on this bigger picture plan. And that is it for me. Yeah, so please, if anyone has any questions, feel free to email me or shoot me a question in the chat. I do see a question from Russ. Why does the proposed PSCO rate increase not apply to medium and large commercial customers if things like fire mitigation? It does apply, Russ, to all customers. I kind of just pulled out some of the rate increases for the residential and the small commercial, but I'd be happy to follow up with you on what the rate increase looks like for those other customer classes. But there will be rate impacts to all customer classes in that case, and it's a big docket with a lot of different interests. In terms of large customers, I know Kroger, for example, is involved, and Molson Coors. So some of those bigger, you know, commercial customers of Excel are involved in the docket to sort of to see, you know, protect their interests as these larger and medium commercial customers. Does anyone else have any questions? Great. Well, yeah, thank you all for taking the time out of your morning for me to give this update. And thank you, Patricia.
Thank you, everyone. I have no idea how long you guys have been waiting there. So I will just jump in really quick. Very exciting, I think, what we're hearing about in terms of codes and the movement that's happening, which has been the whole theme, I think, of our EBC meetings for the last, since the beginning of beneficial electrification coming on the scene 2 years ago, when I was asking, what is this? What are we doing? So in response, this are probably certain topics that need to be part of our action groups that we've started. And there's a couple reasons for it. One is to have more communication in the 2 years in between every one of Excel's DSM plans and when we go into a settlement process typically with them. And we're looking to have more communication in between those time to talk about ideas, how quickly the market's moving, what do we all need, like our discussion today, what do the contractors need and the distributors and manufacturers to deliver in the marketplace, and what market development's needed to help them deliver and bring products to market. And so a couple things, we have the 3 groups. Our lighting group has started meeting, we're having their 3rd meeting. It's a really good group, and they're talking about some of the things that were brought up today, the changes in the 2021 code, and talking about rebates for things that are being talked about in the new code as well. So their next meeting is October 13th at 4 p.m. And I think the meeting was actually yesterday. I think, Shauna, that you mentioned that, so I apologize that it was actually yesterday at 4, and so the next meeting is on October 13th. So definitely, I know, sorry. So definitely join into that. So the heat pump working group, we've not had our first meeting. It's going to be October 14th at 3 o'clock. And there is a link in the slide here to sign up for that meeting. And we're going to start with the entire group, with the dealers, distributors, manufacturers, and the stakeholders together. And we'll probably break off to work on certain topics within that. And then insulation air sealing, which I mentioned during the presentation, is absolutely, I think, in the bullseye of what's happening with all the code changes and electrification. And we're getting the lighting and the HVAC heat pumps off the ground here, and then starting insulation air sealing probably in the beginning of the new year. But exciting, this is the roots. This is why EEBC originally, how we operated. We had committees that were working on the issues in the market that would help their business and create a bigger piece of pie for everybody. And that's exactly what's happening now. And the market's moving so fast that we felt like we really needed to get into action and work on the things to remove barriers for all of us in the market. And also keep on top of what's happening, no surprises. And then how do we work together to accelerate and take advantage of the changes that are coming in the market. So that's what it's about. Any questions? I was going to look at the chat box and see. This is a slide that EBC created for the Beneficial Electrification League presentations and discussion recently with the heat pump distributors and manufacturers, a meeting that was held to find out what they believe their barriers are in the market to transition into heat pumps. But this is the lift that we're all looking at by 2030. And this is what all of our organizations, so when we're talking about the cities and the utilities and the service manufacturers and the contractors, but the drivers of the changes and getting to their goals of, I always go back to the utilities, that 6 of the utilities deliver 91% of the energy in Colorado, and they all have these goals to have 80%, around 80% electrification of their grids and decarbonization by 2030. That's not far away. So if we look at this right now, we're considering that in the next 2 years, we're all collaborating, I think, in our working groups and the Beneficial Electrification League in the cities, and that the goal is that we all impact the market enough that there's this inflection point here in 24 and 25. For example, when Denver is releasing their new 2021 codes, that inflection point happens where then we have exponential growth of 10 to 15% to hit those goals by 2030. So that is a concept that we are all rallying around in the state, and this is stuff that we'll be talking about more of in the groups. Any questions or comments on that? But I think this is shared, even though this is a heat pump forecast, it's still, I think this is representative of all of our industries of what we're going to be seeing and what to expect as we go to these goals that have been set by all these organizations. I think the important thing is it's coming, whether we agree or not, how do we take advantage of it? And the EBC wants to help our businesses, double, quadruple, triple, your business, going forward. I think that is it. I think we're running, we're over time, so I apologize. Any questions before we go? And absolutely join in the action committees because we're going to be working on things that are going to make a difference and need your input, like they were talking about in the codes presentation. If not, thank you everyone for coming. Super appreciate it. And next month, the topic is Buckle Up for 2022, and I'm asking the Belco group to do a representation of their presentation to the heat pump working group at the end, because it shows how all the organizations are working together on these goals. In the Buckle Up, we're talking about what next year looks like in terms of strategic issues and how EEBC is going to participate in that, and how we're like our members to join in and to get your voice heard to set the goals for the next 5 years for demand side management for the rebates in the new plans every 2 years. And then also the docket for the 2023-24 rebate plan from Excel. It sounds like it's going to be a smaller docket and abbreviated just to continue getting 60-day notices through. They're going to wait, Excel Energy is going to wait for the outcomes and the decisions from strategic issues to put in their new 2023-24 plan, and we'll do the full settlement process in 2023. So we want to keep everybody on top of that and communicating with Excel in between with our ideas and our proposals. And then the work that we have planned for transitioning our members and helping our contractors, especially in HVAC and what's happening with heat pumps. So that is it. Super appreciate it, and hope that today was really informational. And please sign up for our next meeting in December 16th, and we'll tackle those issues then. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day.